Welcome to Handmade Happenings. I'm Marissa. Today I'm showing you how to picture smock. So picture smocking is where you use cable stitches kind of stacked on top of each other to create pictures. Now I am going to assume that you know what a cable stitch is if you've made it to this video, but if not, I do have a beginner smocking video that will explain it and I'll link it in the description. So first let's talk about picture smocking plates. This is a free one, which I will link in the description. And this is kind of typical of what they would normally look like, as far as the whole plate. However, I will be only demonstrating on the bus. And because I'm not sure how this turns up on the camera, it's kind of small. I'm just going to flip over my paper and I have it printed in a much larger size so that it should hopefully come up really clearly on the camera. So every plate that I've ever seen has this part up here, which is a chart or graph that I imagine is similar to how cross stitch is done, although I've never done cross stitch, in that each of these represents a stitch. So each of these little half ovals is one stitch. And if this is all your pattern has, then what you do is for every row, let me mark off a row so you can see what it looks like. So that there is what would be considered a row, because remember this is made of cable stitches, and cable stitches are just one stitch down, one stitch up. So if your pattern only has these, then what you're going to have to do is for every row, sit and count it. So this is 23. And then the next row would be a half stitch plus one stitch in yellow, 3 in blue, 3 in yellow, and on down. And this is all you need. And for some, like I said, that's all they have. But I do find that it's really nice if they also include this chart down here, which basically just gives you the numbers, and like each spot is marked off for like color changes and all. And I really like this because it helps so that I don't end up having to count the entire row over and over, because I will always be worried that I'm going to miscount or forget something. And that's why most of the picture smocking plates that I have are by Cross-Eyed Cricket, because they do provide both of these charts and I find it really helpful. Obviously, in addition to your smocking plate, you will need to smock your actual fabric. I'm just using a sample here. Now, if you're doing a pattern like, say, the Children's Corner Lee dress or the Children's Corner Jamie bubble suit, they have pattern pieces that are just already cut to size. And you would just put that up and use it. But if you were doing one where it's a smocked insert, like the Children's Corner Johnny, which just gives you like a rectangle that this is the size that your pleated piece needs to be in order to use it for your item, what I would do is cut my piece of fabric to 4 times the width of that pattern piece. That's more than I normally would for, say, a geometric smocking, because these pleats are going to end up getting pulled really tight and close, and you almost need them, I guess you could say, more dense than you would for geometric smocking. Alright, so now let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to block off that row again. So this is the top row and where the pattern suggests to start. So to read this pattern, basically, the graph tells you both how many stitches and kind of where to start, or like how to start. In this case, that first row is 23 stitches starting with a down cable stitch. So I'm going to put my needle into my piece to the left of the pleat where I want to start. I am right-handed, and I'm not sure I can help you much if you happen to be left-handed. You would, I guess, basically be starting at this end and working that way. From this chart, I know that I need a down pleat and I need to do 23, and that it starts on a row, like one of the pleating rows. So I just do a down stitch, and then up, and keep going for the entire row. And I am using just regular DMC embroidery thread for this, 3 strands. A lot of times in my videos, I will use what's called floche, which is a bit of a thinner fiber. And the one thing that I will say is I use it for picture smocking, but I really shouldn't because it does not turn out as well. It's not as thick of a fiber, and therefore the images always look a little thinner and not as filled in as they probably would if I actually used floss all the time. 23. So this is 23 cable stitches, which matches up with this up here and the number given down here. And I did end on a down stitch, so that helps me to be pretty sure that I counted correctly. And at this point, you do have a couple of options for working the next row. One of them is you could flip the work upside down, flip your pattern upside down, and basically work from the other end. Which, if you actually flip your work, you would once again be working from left to right, and you would just be working on everything upside down. I do that normally, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So at this point, you can just end your row like you normally would with smocking by sticking the needle back down to the wrong side, tying a knot, and go back and restart on the left side again. So coming back, I have moved these down to the next row. And this row is a little different in that it starts with what's considered basically a half stitch. This was a little confusing to me when I first started smocking because I really didn't know what I was supposed to be doing here. But basically what it is doing is it's creating this straight edge with no gaps. So I'm going to come back to this end because it's a half stitch. It starts right in the same spot where I started last time. And this half stitch goes down. So what I'm going to do, normally you go, when you're cabling, you go past this stitch and that stitch and go through there. But instead I'm only going to basically take the needle and move it to the other side of this same pleat and insert it from right to left to make that stitch. This next one is a whole stitch, just going up. And stop because we're going to switch colors. So to do that, I'm just going to move this yellow back to the bottom or back of my work by inserting it in between those pleats. And I'm just going to leave it because I do need it again. I'm going to grab my blue, and we're going to pick up right here with this blue, and that's 3 cable stitches starting with a down right where I left off. So I'm going to insert this literally in the same spot, same pleat where I took the yellow to the wrong side. So that's the 3. And now it switches back to yellow. To put this one to the back. And on the wrong side, what I'm just doing is bringing this along, like I'm going to run those threads kind of loose along the back in order to insert them into the right spot on the front of the work. So I'm back, and 3 of the yellow, 1, 2, 3. And so every time the colors change, it's the same. You just put 1 into the back in between the pleats, and then bring the other one up in the exact same spot to pick up the work. Generally speaking, I mean, once in a while there might be something where you skip a pleat and then you would just start in a slightly different spot, like over one pleat for it, but usually that's how this works. It doesn't look like much right now, oftentimes doesn't on the first couple of rows. It usually starts to take place or take shape a bit more as you go along. This is the last three of the blue. Oh, I forgot to take my yellow to the back. Oh well. It'll be fine there until I finish the blue. So, do the last 3 stitches of blue, or gray, or whatever color this is. My light blue and my gray that I need for this project kind of look the same. This is the last of this, and I'm just going to put it to the back and tie it off. At this point, I'm right here. And then after these 3, there's 2 more of the yellow. So 1 up and 1 down. And you'll notice that that goes a little further past where the last one was. So see here, this is where the first line ended. And so this row here ends 1 stitch over. Now it's time to start the next row. It starts again with a half stitch, this time going up instead of down. And you'll notice that basically with picture smocking, the idea is that the rows are touching and that they're always opposite of each other. So like here I just did an up cable, and it is touching the down cable from the last row that's on that same set of pleats. And that's what you always want. You want to keep it close enough that the rows are touching, but not so close that they're like on top of each other. And that is what starts creating the picture. And that was these 3 here, and now it's these 3 here. And all the way across, the end is a little different, so I probably will just come back when I get to that part. As you can see, it goes slightly past where the last one was. It can be a little tricky when things start extending past and you don't have like a pleating row to follow to keep things straight. I just try to kind of eyeball it based on like the previous stitch when I'm inserting. But anyway, back to this. So I have done these 3, and now you can see I have another stitch, but not one in between it. There's no up stitch here. So that means that I need to skip a pleat. So I'm just going to push it down in between and then pop up again, literally just on the other side of the pleat. And the way you know this, if you're like increasing, decreasing, or skipping stitches, is just to remember that for every stitch, you move over 1 pleat. So I've moved over 1 pleat, and I'm just going to do 1 more stitch. This would be considered a down stitch. And that ends off this row. Now right now, because there's no stitch here, they're not sitting very tightly, but there will be a stitch in the next row that will close that up. Next row is a bit odd, and I have never actually come across this before, but you can see here it's going to be yellow and black, and every other stitch is going to be a color change. So it's going to start with a half yellow stitch again, this time down. That means it's starting in the exact same spot and going down. And then actually switching colors and switching to the black for all of the up stitches. I have never seen this done before, so I assume it's a bit of an uncommon thing. I am kind of tempted, for simplicity's sake, to just do it all in one color or the other, but I'm also trying to show this in sort of like, you know, how it would be done and exactly how to follow it. So I'm not going to. So this is going to be one up, then the down with the yellow. And just switching colors the same as before. And again, basically, you are literally just following this chart, counting stitches, and following it for both the number and the color. I'm not sure how else to describe it, basically. But for this row, because it is a lot of changing back and forth, I'm not going to film it because that would probably be boring because it's going to take longer than necessary. But this one will just go all the way down to the end, and then it's going to actually end with a half gray stitch. I may come back to show you that one. Okay, so I have gone ahead and done all of this row down to here. And you can see this row now is going to start where you're going to end with half stitches, just like you begin with a half stitch. And it is done in gray. So again, with the half stitch, you come up on one side of the pleat, and you literally just go over that pleat and go down into the other side. And since this is the end, I just went down instead of going through the pleat like I normally would. So then the next row is actually a simple one again. So this here is just embroidery, so you can kind of ignore that. And because of that, this next row is a half stitch up. And then if you count all of these stitches, it apparently comes out to 27 in yellow. And then one half cable in the gray. And I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera since it's pretty simple. And then I will come back for the next row where we're going to talk about what to do when you have to kind of increase your stitches at the beginning of a row. Alright, so I just finished this row here. We come down to this row, and up until this point, all of the rows have started on the same spot. But what do you do if the row starts further over than where you've been starting? Well, we've already covered what you do when you get to the end and it goes further that way. You just keep going, obviously, the number that you need. When it starts further this way, what you're going to do is kind of take your needle of whichever one you need. You're going to look at your fabric and you're going to go, okay, normally I would start here. And then you're going to count however many stitches you need to go over. In this case, it's only one. So for every stitch that I need to go, I'm going to count one pleat to the left. So that would just be 1. And this is where I'm going to start. And basically, if it's like 1 or 2 stitches to the left, then I would just do it this way. If not, if it was like a dramatic amount of stitches one way or another, what I might do is start in the same spot, work my way that way, and then just flip and start in the same spot and work my way the other way upside down. But this one's pretty simple. It's just that one stitch that needs to be done. Now I have done some patterns that have like big gaps. Like I did a whale one recently on here. that had a lot of big gaps in between pieces, like where the tail is and everything. A lot of times what I do with that is I might count or figure out, what stitch I need to start on with what I've already done, and then just count from there, or try and start on it and not try and start in the middle. Like try to start connected to what's already there, as opposed to starting hovering in mid space in that case. And at this point, I don't see any major changes in the pattern, so I'm probably just going to finish it off camera and then come back and wrap up this part of the video. Right, so here it is finished. You can see how it takes up that shape. Now I will say that this last row, I realized after I started that it is actually a little different in that it basically, other than the tires, skips every other stitch. So similar up here where you did all the downs in yellow and all the up stitches in black, with this one, you did all the up stitches and you just kept skipping the down ones. So that's a bit different. That means that you basically just have to move over every stitch over to the opposite side of the stitch, going towards the right before you do it again. So I have to say, I'm not sure that this would be the best pattern to start with if you're looking to try picture smocking. I just used it because it was free, and I figured that was best since I basically had to show you the entire pattern in order to explain what I was doing here. I hope this tutorial was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. And thank you for watching.